This talk is given by James Arlen. It's on SCADA and ICS, how to avoid cyber douchery.
Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody sliding into a nice pasta coma after lunch. So, hi. We're going to talk about SCADA, but we're going to talk about SCADA in a bit of a different way than you've ever really heard before. This is for good reason, because entirely too many people are talking when they really shouldn't be talking. My name is James Arlen. I have some credentials, been at this for a while. I do operations work, I do consulting work, I deal with utilities vertical, I deal with financial vertical, and I'm not an expert. And that's going to be a bit of a recurring theme. This is not a talk about SCADA, it's a talk about talking about SCADA, because as an industry we need to train ourselves to know when it's a good time to talk and when it's a good time to listen. And we suck hard at the listening part. There's some technical material. I don't want to, but I'm going to talk about smart grid, which is not SCADA. I'm going to talk about Siemens and Stuxnet, which is not SCADA either. And you will not be an expert walking out of here. You cannot be trained to be an expert in this stuff in a day. Don't even try. So the first problem we have is there's a lot of stupid going around. And there's good reasons for this. You know, when you look at what happened about 2005, just as SOX was trailing off in terms of consulting revenue budget, the information security industry noticed SCADA. And, well, you know what happens. You identify a market and you figure out how to move into that market. In this case, it's just money, frankly. It's very large consulting organizations that were built on the back of the Y2K hump that turned into the SOX hump that turned into the critical infrastructure hump, and it's just sad, frankly. The interesting part, though, is that simultaneously with a whole lot of consultants looking for jobs, there's new regulations that were coming into effect. You were looking at ISA 99 coming into effect and the NERC 1200 Urgent Action Standard. And because a packet is a packet is a packet, of course, if you're in IT security, you know everything there is to know about SCADA, don't you? I mean, it's just another protocol. So suddenly you had, you know, a million SCADA security experts, and then things got religious. You guys know about the three major security religions, the ISC squared, the ISACA, and the SANS. One of those religions picked up on this thing and ran like crazy directly to Congress. At this point, I was working in control system security. I was doing electricity in particular, and as much as I could, I tried pointing out to people that the way that IT security was approaching it was the wrong way. And I got about as far as you can expect. I needed to develop a much larger ego to be able to talk one-on-one with IT security people because they can't check their egos at the door. While I was doing this work in the electricity sector, all of a sudden I had swarms of consultants around me. And it's very interesting, the kind of vulture-like behavior when they can smell something that needs to be dealt with. And a bunch of consultants, some InfoSec dudes and dudettes, showed up, and they started telling me that they knew control system security. So as a person sitting there responsible for control system security, I was somewhat shocked and awed. I wasn't really good at my job yet. I had a ton more to learn, but they were experts. They tied a nice little bow on my problems, and they told me that they could fix it. All my problems could be solved. All I needed were a few blinky lights and a few shiny things, and it was all going to be fine. If I bought these boxes and I put them in, it was all good. Yeah. So I told you we're going to talk about SCADA systems. Here's the short form part of it. The language is very, very important, and manipulating language is something that engineers really enjoy. They often treat language just like they would treat anything else. There are levels of precision There are levels of correctness, there are levels of the right words. They're kind of a lot like car people. And our industry has been not meeting them on their ground, but meeting them on ground that we created because we thought it sounded good. When we're talking about something that looks an awful lot like a bicycle derailleur and we're calling it a synchro mesh transmission, there's much confusion because our words and their words don't match up. And really, it's our fault. Because not all SCADA is SCADA. I know, it's kind of shocking, isn't it? You've heard a lot about SCADA talk. SCADA this, SCADA that, SCADA in the news. And the reality is, SCADA is big things. SCADA is things like power grids. They're highly geographically distributed. They're dispersed assets. So think water supply systems. Think large-scale power grid. If it isn't on a pylon like this, it's not considered big. Wooden poles do not a power grid make. It's things like railways. It's things like long-distance pipelines. So the kind of pipeline that stretches from Alaska to the rest of the United States. That kind of pipeline, okay? These kinds of assets, they occur all over the place, but largely you wouldn't notice them because they don't take up a lot of room. You can have a pipeline that goes by your house. There's actually a major pipeline, and you wouldn't even know that it was there because it's buried under the frost line. Or in the southern United States, I guess you don't have frost, you just have swamps and deserts, so I guess they don't bury them there. You've got a bunch of interconnections, and it's this interconnection part that becomes very, very important later on. You've got centralized data acquisition, centralized control, sometimes, but not always. And these things are critical to protect the overall security of the system. And right there, we sort of hit the first time when we've got words that don't match. Because when control systems people and SCADA people talk about system security, they're not talking about information security, they're not talking about IT security, they mean something completely different. They mean, is this going to blow up, fall down, or kill people? So they're talking about the security of the system as an ongoing running entity. And then a bunch of consultants come along and say, hey, we know all about security. And we're off to the wrong foot already. These interconnected systems all end up with this central management problem. And, well, in reality, data center management is something that IT security is not too bad at. We've been spending the last 10 years doing exactly the same thing we did the year before, but we're not too bad at that. So remember, large systems, geographically dispersed and used for huge control undertakings. That's SCADA. Okay, firing a plug of oil that has gas in front of it and gas behind it, so you can think of it as this unit that is moving through a pipeline, followed by a little gap and then another plug of a different kind of fluid. And you're starting to see you've got, you know, the same kind of complexity that you would expect in what happens when model trains go bad, only very large scale, big stuff. Control systems, on the other hand, are little things like chemical plants and nuclear plants and manufacturing facilities. This is not SCADA. This is industrial control systems. You're going to find them in oil and gas refineries. You're going to find them in manufacturing plants. You're going to find them in all those places that you would find if you watched the Discovery Channel and learned how it's all made. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. You find them in automotive production, you find them in food production, donuts. You've got a lot of little independent capabilities that sometimes get knitted together in interesting ways, but more often than not, there is no real functional knitting between two different control systems in the same organization. You know, the production line for donuts is not one production line. It's not one machine. It's a number of different machines that do different jobs. There's a certain level of orchestration, but in large part, there's no requirement for that kind of orchestration. What the requirements are for really relate to business process management stuff. It relates to, get me back information about how many donuts I used, get me back information about when I need to reorder more glazing for the donuts. There was no dessert for lunch in my world, so donuts on the mind. These control systems that come, you guys are not laughing. You're all in a pasta coma. It's terrifying. These multiple integrated subsystems, so you've got things like programmable logic controllers, which are astonishingly simple machines. They do things like ladder logic. Anybody remember learning ladder logic in first year comp sci? Yeah. You ever seen it again? Only in control systems. Right. So you got to dust off that book that you studied a few years ago and try to remember it. You're usually finding these in places where you wouldn't expect to find a computer. You know, it wouldn't occur to you that there's going to be a computer here. And in order to get information back from them, you know, this is a steel manufacturing plant, to get the information back from them, you're taking and adding on networking devices to ladder logic controllers that run at cycles per second, sometimes even cycles per minute. So a very strange kind of world. And that's industrial control systems or distributed control systems. This is not SCADA. Okay? This lack of understanding, it's kind of a critical lack of understanding, but it's an important lack of understanding. Here it doesn't matter. We're temporarily going to step aside and we're going to say it doesn't matter whether we're talking about SCADA or we're talking about control systems. That's kind of irrelevant for the moment because when it comes right down to it, the computers aren't the thing that's being controlled. This is like almost everything else in InfoSec. If you sort of pay attention to what you're actually up to, the computers are not the reason why there's even an involvement for you. They're almost secondary to all of this stuff. And it's kind of hard to get through your head that the systems aren't as reliant on the computers as you think. Exactly what you would expect would happen happens. Edna falls into the reactant vessel and the system stops because that's what it's supposed to do. So if you take over the control system and you're super elite and you can figure out what coil 13 does on Modbus TCP and you manage to completely break the system, it stops. That's what happens when the computers break. So this is data. This is what you're getting when you're looking at protocols. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at, you know, EIP, DH+, Profibus, DMP3, ICCP, OPC. It doesn't matter. It's a data blob. And you guys understand data blobs, right? You can do protocol deconstruction until the cows come home. And you're perfectly fine with that, right? Everybody knows how to install Wireshark and everybody can do, yeah, nods, Postacomas. The data doesn't mean a whole lot, though. When it comes right down to it, you've got this kind of huge problem. You've got no map to the process. You know, in the data, you can't see the process. You can see outputs from the process. You can see that sensor 14 has a reading of 132. Where's sensor 14? What does it do? And what does 132 mean? Is that Fahrenheit, Celsius, inches, pounds, megajoules? You can't know. This process map stuff becomes really important. A protocol stream is just a bit stream. In large part, these are all serial protocols that have simply been mapped into IP packets. It's complicated, but it's not that complicated. You need to see the mapping or find the mapping or figure out a way to build the mapping. But, you know, I'm not kidding myself. There are severe rock star reverse engineers out there, right? 1, 2, there's probably 10 of them talking here. I mean, they're really, really, really good. And what do you think they could do? They can break the computer. Sure. Modbus TCP has this great command structure built into it. It's absolutely terrific. You can send it a command that says, stop, followed immediately by a command that says, and also stop listening. You broke it. Yay. But can you make the computer do what you want it to do? Can you figure out what that 132 means on that sensor? And know that if you change it to 142, badness happens. You can break part of it. You might even be able to break all of it. But can you break all of the controls that are in that system? Or just the computer controls? Yeah. There's a whole additional system built into any control system, any SCADA system, that's called safety. And it is, with very minor exceptions, completely separate. It has different requirements, it operates in a different kind of way. It's much more closely attuned to the physical nature of the thing rather than the production data that comes from the thing or the operations data that comes from the thing. It's there to protect the equipment and keep it from going all, you know, Skynet, Terminator on you, because the computers are still in charge. You might manage to completely screw the process up. I mean, you change that 132 to 0, and something didn't flow right into a reactant vessel, and the shampoo came out without the part that makes your hair extra glossy. They find that because they test, and they generally throw it out the door. If they don't catch it before it has left the door, you get these things called product recalls. It happens. We haven't gone completely Skynet yet. None of these systems are completely autonomous. There is no completely automated factory that completely manufactures everything completely on its own without any human intervention whatsoever. We're not there yet. There's always a human person. There's an operator, a controller. This is largely a liability thing because computers aren't allowed to legally make decisions on their own. You need a bag of mostly water to take care of that. But maybe you are a super hacker. Maybe you've busted the SCADA system. You've completely pwned it. They kind of plan for that because stuff breaks. Most systems, they don't even really have a problem with 2 simultaneous failures. They just keep chugging along. This happens fairly often. You know, even when it's actually on fire, it just keeps happening because stuff falls down, it gets picked up, it gets repaired. You know, the people who do this stuff know what they're doing. Doing a live repair on a huge transmission line is not a problem. They do it hanging out of a helicopter if necessary. Disturbing to watch, but it's done. Pipelines break, they pick them up, they weld them back together, and they sometimes clean up the mess. And, you know, 99 times out of 100, and you know, really more like 99,999 times out of 100,000, you don't feel it at all. Can anybody remember the last time that the water stopped in the city they live in? I got one hand that was only half up. Anybody remember the last power outage? Yeah, that happens all the time. Those are both SCADA systems. The water doesn't tend to stop. Maybe the water people have got something figured out. You don't notice this stuff. You've got a cozy little house. There's no one wandering the streets looking for flesh to feed on. You don't notice this stuff. Except, you know, Aurora, Smart Grid, Stuxnet. Okay, so Aurora demonstration. Everybody remember the Aurora demonstration? Wasn't that awesome? It was on CNN. The pundits could talk about it like crazy. Yes, under very, very controlled circumstances with some modest effort and a completely known target surface, you can make things go bang. In fact, a lot of things go bang. Most chemical plants go bang pretty good. Lots of manufacturing goes bang kind of in an awesome way. You end up with things like 2 chemicals mixing together in a reactant vessel, and you stop the flow of one chemical and the other chemical then hardens. And now you've got a reactant vessel that's full of a solid plug of material that needs to be replaced. So you screwed things up and good. Suggesting that your relative, you know, garden variety DEF CON hacker is going to pull this off, you know, today, not happening. Smart meters, they're not SCADA. What do people know about smart meters? It's kind of an interesting topic because it's adjacent to SCADA, but it doesn't really have anything at all to do with it. Smart meters are metering. It's billing management. It's revenue management. It's controlling sometimes a little bit. And then you look at what kind of control are you talking about. Most smart meters, it's turn it on, turn it off, which is a feature of billing. It's not a feature of operations. all right? It's saving you from rolling a truck. If you live in a university town, you're probably knee-deep in smart meters because they're tired of rolling trucks every 4 months to change the meters. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe, if you're in a really advanced jurisdiction, you're looking at a case where you've got some demand load management. Yeah, anybody heard of this, where they control your air conditioner, turning it on, turning it off, trying to cycle things and keep it all nice and safe and smooth and flat? Yeah, that's not built into the meter, that's built into the thermostat. That's a different kind of box in your house. And it's not SCADA either, that's actually paging. It's kind of weird. Then there's Stuxnet. Well, somebody needs to talk about it, so I guess it'll be me. Everybody, and I mean everybody, is talking about Stuxnet now. It doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter where they're from, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about this. It's showing up in business news, it's showing up in IT news, it's showing up in the Christian Science Monitor, it's showing up in places that you would never expect it. And then the bloggers came out. And this is the part where it just gets foolish. This is not a SCADA vulnerability. This is a process control vulnerability. It's a very specific kind. It's one that I've long predicted would occur. It's bad, but it's not that bad, really. It's something that is sort of exactly the problem that control systems face. It's not a new kind of attack. It smells an awful lot like I put a floppy disk in my IBM PC in 1983 and things went bad. And that's sort of the critical gap. It's that these are solved problems that have become unsolved because the wrong people are paying attention, or because it's presumed that because we don't use floppy disks anymore, that kind of attack can't occur, right? We all use the internet for everything, right? Portable media still exists, you still have to protect against it. You'd think that on an engineering workstation, you wouldn't have access to additional drives and stuff like that. But the reality is that somebody needs to support it, and so they're going to need to be able to install new software on it, so you're going to have additional drives. And when it comes right down to it, computers are hard. And so nobody's fixing this stuff. And it is really kind of all of our faults, right? Because IT security for a long time now has been fixated, I think is probably the best way to put it, completely fixated on the locked down desktop, which has solved all IT security problems. We haven't had a single breach or major vulnerability since we started severely locking the desktops down, right? Yeah. The solution to the problem, very simply, is to start working together, because we're sniping at each other. The control systems people are sniping at the IT security people. The IT security people are sniping at the control systems people. And then there's these guys, the manufacturers of the mess. Very few people have actually read this. I mean, everybody's read the news stories, and everybody's looked at the media stuff, and everybody knows about Stuxnet, but nobody's actually looked at the disclosure from Siemens. And it's very interesting, and it bears repeating out loud, because I haven't heard anybody repeat the section out loud. If you look at the second line at the very end there, where it says, the internal system authentication is based on predefined access data. Does anybody know what predefined access data means? It's called a password. So if the manufacturer is pulling skeezy marketing / legal issues, maybe it's time to vote with the dollar, you know? So what can we do? It'd be good to do something, right? Because we can't leave it the way it is. It's kind of a mess. So all of you are perfectly smart. I'm betting on that because I need to. You've just got to pay attention and focus. Because you've got time, right? You've solved all of your organizational IT security stuff? Yeah? Feet up on your desk most of the time? Yeah. You've got this war going on between business and asset owners and traditional IT departments and control system IT departments, and this war is not one that's being fought lightly. In most organizations, there's sufficient empire building that this is a make or break kind of fight, and they're going to fight it right until the bitter end. I'm asking you to suck it up. You're not the expert. I mean, maybe you do have an office at Starbucks and you are a hipster and you're the best, complete rock star, but probably not. If you're going to spend time at Starbucks, it should be because you're buying people coffee and asking them questions. You need to be the student first. And this is really, really hard for all of us because we've all worked our butts off to get to the top of the profession, right? We're IT security. We're at Blackhat. Come on. We're good at this stuff. But we don't actually know much about it. Being the student is important, you know. If you think about it, whether you're a consultant who goes in and works in other large organizations, or whether you work in an IT department, or whether you work in a compliance department, do you actually know what it is that the company does? I mean, you might know part of it from the name, like I work for an insurance company, but how does that widget cranking machine in the back, the operations part of the organization, do what it does to make money? This is a pretty common question that I would tend to ask because I'm that kind of pedantic jerk. But lots of people never do. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody with, you know, post-pasta hand-waving, but most people have no idea what it is the organization really does. And you could learn that. Because if you don't, you're going to really do a terrible job of being a teacher. Because you're not going to show understanding or comprehension of the needs of the person that you're trying to teach. Everyone is unique. Everyone is special. Suck it up. Put the goofy smile on. Do the night stuff. You wouldn't believe the number of things that I could tell you about it. It's twisted almost. Most organizations that use SCADA, most organizations that use control systems, they're unionized, even in the IT department, among the engineering staff, among the IT security folks. So you're in a position where you're getting like woodshed talks down on the loading dock, and you need to adapt for that. You need to be able to route around that kind of a problem because your rock star attitude is killing you. And the vast majority of the people who are working in control systems are much older than you. They would prefer good old 8-bit computers that were deterministic in behavior. Modern Windows operating systems are only vaguely deterministic. In the most part, you're about the age of their kids, which makes you really hard to listen to. So you got to work past that. You need to understand the organization, and I mean really understand it. Know all of the moving pieces, know where the empire building is happening, know who's the king of each empire, who's the queen of each empire. You need to spend some time shadowing. This is a system. And we're all really, really good at taking systems apart, figuring them out, and putting them back together. This system exists in a box that usually looks more like an office building and less like that fancy new tower computer you've got. If you do this, doors will start to open. And things will get good. You'll go from basic keeping the lights on kind of InfoSec work to the kind of InfoSec work where you're getting positive change. But that positive change isn't because you're pushing it. It's because you're drawing it towards you. There's a lot of preconceptions that we have to work through. And the preconceptions are kind of awful because each one of them needs to be torn down completely. Everybody knows how to hack a computer, right? And it's an awesome, awesome kind of thing. I mean, when you get in to doing some of that serious hacking stuff, when you get into the computer and you just own it and you're awesome, you fixated on the protocol You're fixated on little technical minutia, and generally speaking, you're doing it wrong because you're not paying attention to the user interface elements. I mean, they come in different shapes and forms, but most of the time it's that you haven't done the basic user interface stuff. You haven't looked at log files. You haven't locked systems down. You're looking in the wrong place for the weirdness. You're not going to find weirdness in DNP3. You're not going to find weirdness in Modbus. You're not going to find weirdness in ICCP. You're going to find a lot of weirdness in Remote Desktop Protocol. You're going to find a lot of weirdness in X Windows. You're going to find a lot of weirdness in Telnet. Look in the right kind of place, because otherwise your effectiveness just isn't there. The media, I love them. I love them so much. You know, they sing this song, and it's a brilliant song. They can't get enough of it, and I don't know why. And really, they're the ones who are controlling the dollars. When it comes right down to it, you've got people making business decisions because you've got hackers everywhere. You have the same people with the same stories, and this stuff almost worse, you know, over the last couple of weeks, this stuff just turns into this completely demented preconception. 14-year-olds interested in world domination through owning power grid systems. I know a few 14-year-olds, 14-year-old boys, they're not interested in that. The conservatives might want you to think of a different kind of person who's after you. Okay. The reality, it's middle-aged white guys. I mean, hacking is so easy, a white guy can do it, so. It's probably not these guys. They're trying, they really are. A few months ago, Booz Allen Hamilton landed the contract to build the new Air Force Cyber War Control Center. $14.4 million in taxpayer money. That's going to get them a cyber war bunker. Didn't know you needed a bunker for that. They're going to spend another $20 million on fostering collaboration between telecommunications researchers, University of Maryland faculty members, and other academic institutions to improve secure networking communications. That sounds an awful lot like a mailing list and a wiki. But hey, it's $20 million. That's got to be money well spent, right? It's probably more like this kind of group of people, but there's a lot easier ways to fight a war against the United States. There's an economic war. They could simply call the debt and repossess the United States. Kind of sad. This is much more likely. The genetically engineered super soldiers will be here shortly. Skynet is manufacturing them. And of course, there's the internet, because it's out to get you. So it's always good to tell a few stories about stuff that actually happened. And this is not necessarily public news. Everybody knows that SCADA networks have DMZs, because you've all heard that. In every talk you've heard about SCADA, you've heard about the SCADA DMZ that air gaps things and that there's protections or not. SCADA systems directly on the internet. A couple of Google search terms will teach you all kinds of stuff about that. Do you know that VLANs are a security mechanism? You can use those to keep traffic completely segregated from other traffic. It's true. Vendor defaults. This is an interesting kind of problem because it's, you know, the problem that we're all facing. The vendor defaults are kind of horrible. When it comes to the end of the story, turnkey systems are where it's at. If you can install a system that just does what it's supposed to do, it gets installed the same way everywhere. So if you're looking at a piece of hardware like a pallet wrapper, it's exactly the same. Doesn't matter where it's installed. It's always going to have the same IP address. Always going to have the same username and password. Probably it's not connected to anything, but they might have thrown it on the network just so they can keep track of it. That happens all the time. Guest accounts, username, user, password, password. This is a daily occurrence kind of thing. These are the kind of problems that IT security can solve. but not by being the way that we're used to being, right? We have to be that much better way, that much more useful way, where we can say, let me help you with that problem you're having. And it can be done. Lots of shared networks. A lot of interesting sort of vendor-related product problems. Did you know that you can get an HMI interface for a BlackBerry? So you can control your process from, your car while you're driving. Is that a problem? Might be. There's a lot of anti-operator boredom systems installed. Because you can imagine doing something like watching a manufacturing plant manufacture cookies. That's got to be a pretty boring job if you're sitting in the control room just monitoring the process. So, you've got to have games and alternatives for ways to spend your time rather than actually watching the process. Those things are all out there. It's kind of a terrifying problem. The any rule is the only rule. And these systems aren't just out there a little bit, they're out there a lot. And they need to get fixed. But the way that we're going about yelling and ranting and raving and talking about control system stuff isn't going to get them fixed. I don't think in any kind of a real time. I've seen it all. There's probably ways to fix it. I mean, we could fix it with superheroes. Or we could just follow instructions. Because, even that ridiculous SCADA vulnerability, there's instructions that they give you about how to secure those systems. And if you follow the instructions, you're actually okay. From a product liability kind of standpoint, you're in pretty good shape. If the system's any older than brand new, though, even the simplest hardening techniques that you can think of will probably break it completely. You will need to leave our services turned on because RSH and RCP are used extensively by most Unix-based systems. You will have to turn file sharing on. You will have to turn on all RPC if you're going to run it on Windows because they're all completely dependent upon it. It's terrible, but follow the instructions. And try not to suck. Because the machines do exactly what they're told. And it's not an industry that's going anywhere fast. There's still a lot of hydraulic computers in use in control systems and SCADA industries. Anybody know what a hydraulic computer is? Yeah, it's odd. It's not really studied much anymore, but it's a computer that is a series of gates, just like a regular modern electronic computer. But instead of electrons flowing through those gates, it's oil. Yeah. And they've interfaced that by bolting something onto the side of it that makes it semi-electronic. And it's still out there, and it's entirely possible that if you live in an older city, your lights are dependent upon a machine like that. And I don't know any really good way to harden that. There isn't really a good way. Most of the assets that are involved in this stuff are 20, 30, 40, 100 years old. We've just started turning off 100-year-old power generation systems because we're finally stopping the use of 25 hertz electricity in North America. The last time 25 hertz was used in a household kind of perspective was the 20s. Those things have been running since then. This is a world that isn't going to get changed real quickly now. I need you to learn. I need you to learn a lot. And this is kind of a ridiculous ask because you're at conferences like this to learn. But I'm saying really learn. Consume knowledge at a crazy rate. And consume knowledge outside of IT security. Okay, the places where you're going to learn about this stuff are in control systems theory classes. It's going back and learning ladder logic. It's going back and learning some really, really fundamental stuff about how manufacturing is done. This is engineering, and we're playing at it like we're engineers, and we're not. and that's a huge part of the problem. Most experts aren't. If anybody tells you they're an expert, or if they're really, really, really proud of being an expert, run in the other direction as fast as you possibly can. The project timelines that we're talking about are really long. Installing a new process control system is years. Installing a new SCADA EMS for a big electrical system is years to double-digit years, 12 to 15 years. Developing the models for these things is about that long, and you can't swap one out for the other. I mean, the cutover from one EMS to another takes a year. And if you're coming from a financial kind of background, or if you're coming from any other real sector, you're thinking of cutovers in terms of weekends. This is cut over in terms of years. So you can make little tiny changes right at the very beginning. You can make sure that the procurement language makes sense, that you're getting the right thing. You can make sure that the project stuff works out in a positive kind of way because you're making little tiny adjustments right near the very beginning, and you end up with a great result at the end. The people who put themselves out there as the mouthpieces, some of them have cred, some of their cred's kind of old. If your bullshit meter is going off, there's a good reason for that. And the problem, I think, really is for all of us, our bullshit meters internally are not functioning when our mouths are working. And that's possibly the biggest kind of problem. If you catch people performing gratuitous acts of cyberdouchery, call them on it, please. If you find yourself doing it, I don't even have words for you. Fix it. Fix the problem. It can be fixed. Because you're not Zero Cool, you're not Neo, you're not the Plague, you're not whatever John Travolta's character was named in that movie either. Persuasion and humility are ridiculously powerful tools. Attitude and better than you are incredibly weak, incredibly ineffective ways to achieve your goals. Shameless self-promotion helps a lot too. Become known as the person who wants to listen. Become known as the person who actually cares. Remember the names of people's kids. Remember what they take in their coffee. This sounds so ridiculous, I can't even believe I'm saying it. This is like Mitnick 101, okay? We need to do this stuff. We need to do it with our coworkers. It's not that hard, really. Add requirements, but do it in a water drop kind of way. You know, individual drops of water can wear away mountains. It doesn't mean you've got to try and get rid of the mountain today. Because remember, we're talking timelines that are intensely long. And because we're all caffeine addicted, completion specialists who just try to get stuff done now, doesn't mean we have to be that way. We can get stuff done a little later. We can make friends. You can boil a frog without scaring the frog. The IT security industry itself, depending on how you measure it, is probably only something like 20 years old. That's an unbelievably dense history, though. We've come an awful long way. You look at the history of IT itself, that's short, 70 years. And there's a lot that can be learned there, too. We've challenged most of these problems and solved them in the past. But the best way to tell somebody that you've solved their problem before is not to tell them that you've solved their problem before, because that just ticks them off and makes them push you out the door. You can say, I've seen this before, I think. Can we work through this together? There's lots of comparable situations. The financial industry went through a lot of this stuff about 10 years ago. There's a lot of lessons learned there. You can study how these things happen. I mean, you can study a time when computers did what they were supposed to do. You know, my laptop no longer behaves in a way that could be construed as deterministic. It has a mind of its own, and I just have to accept that. Big computers the same way. But maybe we don't need control systems and SCADA computers to be that way. Maybe we're doing things in the wrong kind of order. And if nothing else, we can make the change, I hope. That's what I've got. Time for questions? Lots of time for questions, actually, because I talked really, really fast. Yep.
So everyone want to thank you. This is the talk I've been waiting to hear on SCADA for the last 10 years.
Awesome. This is the 4th year in a row I submitted it. But this year, Jeff Moss said, "You're doing this talk," and I said, "Yes, sir." Sorry, question in the front?
So, I've been working for 2 years in process control and security, so basically every 6 months we double the knowledge and really been stressed to work with engineers to understand the way they work, so I agree with most of what you say. I think that...
Mostly agreeing. Sorry, I'm just putting it back into the microphone. Mostly agreeing.
I think that here the problem is that, so IT security consultants suck in this world because...
Yes, I am one, I know.
No, in the sense that they are facing, they believe that with their own, it's called an old technology, they can solve the problem of these people, right? There is a different playground here. So you cannot just install integrators. So I work with, I'm in contact with some companies who say, well, let's install Norton to detect intruders. But Norton doesn't have any serious signal, or I mean, signals for known vulnerabilities in SCADA or process control, but you can find out one new every day, right? So I think that's the biggest problem. And so they suck in the sense that they are trying to find out the problem.
Okay, so let me rephrase that just to make sure that we've got it. So making the assertion that the biggest problem that we have is that we're trying to do things using current technology, and most of that current technology doesn't have the right bits and pieces. And I would say, yes, absolutely, with one little added bonus on that. And that's that the way that you're going to get into systems has nothing at all to do with the SCADA protocol itself. You can't drive a user interface across Modbus TCP. It doesn't work that way. But you can gain access to the X Windows protocol that's being used to display the HMI. You can gain access to RDP or Windows vulnerabilities. So it's that simultaneously control systems are extraordinarily special and very, very different, and also exactly the same. And the kinds of vulnerabilities that we need to be looking for and the kinds of things we need to protect against are exactly the same things that we need to protect against on the enterprise IT side, because those air gaps don't exist in practice. Those DMZs don't exist in practice. Those firewalls are interesting because they're acting entirely as routers. So the solution has to be the working together. It has to be the saying, okay, tell me what's different and special, because everyone is different and special. But then let's work on what we can work on. Let's solve the problems that we can solve instead of waiting for some magic bullet. The perfect, this is right up there with web application firewalls. I mean, someone will come out with an application firewall for SCADA, and the rule set's going to be very simple. The rule set's going to say, I want you to process and manage and monitor and control each and every one of these SCADA protocols. And then the bottom rule is going to be, if it's RDP, X Windows, Telnet, SSH, or a database connection, just pass it clear. And then you're not firewalling the stuff that you need to firewall. And that's that kind of error. Right.
Yes, you can look into OPC.
Yep.
ABB or Siemens, they have their own implementation.
No. Oh yeah, wonder OPC doesn't look anything at all like any of the others. So yeah, absolutely.
So I think that so where I don't agree is about the past success. Because I don't see really success in this world because basically because of the vendors. Because the vendors don't allow you to do certain. I mean, there are some controls that have an embedded web server you can switch off. What? Because they are doing licensing for that. So they check if the license is working, and for me, they need a license.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that there's a solution. If you find one though, let me know. There hasn't been one in my career, and I've been at this for a long, long time. I mean, I started doing process control in manufacturing 15 years ago, and I haven't seen a decent solution from anyone yet. Orange shirt that matched the ones I was wearing yesterday.
In the control systems world, obviously, you're designing your last 10, 15, maybe 20 years.
Yep.
In the Windows world, we're lucky to be around 7 years out.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got a lot of control systems that are being implemented on Windows.
Yep.
And how do you reconcile that world when you're working with control systems?
Okay, so the question is, most control systems are being installed with a 10, 15, 20-year life cycle, but they're being installed with control elements that are manufacturer limited to 5 or 6 years. You're absolutely correct. The reconciliation for that, this is going to turn into a rant really, really fast. Are there any engineers in the room? Close your ears, because this one's exactly on your heads. 50 years ago, the engineering profession didn't do what it was supposed to do. A bunch of people started calling themselves software engineers, and the engineering profession didn't protect against that. They all need to get a thunk on the head for that. What's happening now, and when you look at how those systems are being implemented or installed, almost all of them have an engineering stamp on them. And that engineer who stamped it is personally liable for the system as built. And that engineer can in no way suggest that he or she understands the complexity of the system that they just structured and stamped. And that failure is the critical failure. And in control systems and SCADA, fortunately or unfortunately, there are an absolute deck of engineers. And they're all on the hook for this mistake. They're all on the hook for saying, yes, I'm okay with this entire system, and I will sign off on this entire system. And there's this little circle in the middle that says Windows. And there's no one who can sign off and say Windows is a deterministic system that is of engineering grade. Engineers go to great lengths to determine all of the characteristics of T6061 aluminum before they're going to specify that this part should be built out of it. They know its breaking strength, they know if you try and break it this way or if you try and break it that way, they know its ductility, they know all kinds of things about it, they know how it behaves at different temperatures. Ask an engineer to give you the same explanation that they can give you about a metal rod, about a Windows machine. And then you can find out who's exactly at fault for that system. So the reconciliation, it's time for engineers to step up. It's time for the engineering profession to tell software engineers to put it down. It's time for people who want to do this for real to go back to school. Getting an engineering degree as an adult sucks. Going back to school as an adult sucks. But facing facts, I'm on career number 3. I'm not that old. And what I went to school for has nothing to do with what I do for a living now. So if you're not going back to school every 10 years, you're making a mistake. The much more actionable version of an answer to that question that isn't a rant is very simple. The way that it's being done now, which is that those computer systems stay installed, they don't get changed out. If you think that any power grid in North America runs on current generation hardware or current generation operating systems, you are incorrect. They all run on previous generations, and I'm not talking N-1, I'm talking N-2, N-3. Most power grid HMI is bought off of eBay because it's not available from the manufacturer anymore. Unless they've got a Windows shim in place, in which case it's probably an X-Windows station rather than an actual Unix station. Depends on which EMS system it is. It's an absolute mess. And there's no quick or easy fix for it. Anybody else? Sure. Department of Homeland Security and Lofty Perch, yeah. This isn't a tools talk, this is a we need to stop talking talk because we're all talking too much. There are lots of very good assessment tools available. CSAT's definitely one of them. But it's kind of the wrong tool in the wrong time in the wrong place. The problems that are being faced in process control or in control systems in general aren't the kinds of ones that are even amenable to that kind of solution. You know, the big joke is you're not going to end up with cyber cookies of death if you manage to break into a cookie manufacturing plant. But most cookie manufacturing plants are not at a point where they can absorb that material. They are entirely vendor dependent. And that vendor dependency means they, much to your point before, they have to buy what the vendor sells. And the desire on the part of the vendors to sell something good is sharply limited. They're much more interested in selling what they had available for you last year. This is essentially the copyright problem as expressed in a different way. Because they can sell you another control system for free, the marginal cost of an additional control system from them from a manufacturing perspective is nil. So they want to sell you the control system they already have. They don't want to develop a new one. They don't want to re-engineer one. And in a lot of cases, it's almost impossible to do. You know, the network map for an EMS takes 15 years to develop. There is no way that you can just buy another EMS. You're almost vendor locked because of your network map or because of your process map. So you have to keep buying. Like if you have a Wonderware based process, you pretty much have to buy Wonderware, or you have to face re-engineering your process. And if you don't watch a whole lot of how it's made on Discovery Channel, you probably should, because you'll learn stuff that will blow your mind. Yep.
Great, not much you said. Would you agree that those same statements hold true for what's being built today in the emerging or developing world? In other words, do they have a chance to start over and do it better, or no?
There's an interesting kind of problem there because they've got the generational skip issue, right? So, this is the question: is in the developing world, are they facing the same issues that we're facing? They have the generational skip issue, right? Which is that they don't have legacy technologies. There is no publicly switched telephone network in most developing countries. There are cell phone networks. They just skipped that entire generation of technology completely. In large part, this means that there's that same sort of opportunity for a positive thing to happen, to say we're not going to roll out that technology at all. But I think the issue that we're seeing is the technologies that they're implementing aren't new. The specific devices aren't new. The specific devices are old. So they're taking what we've cast off as being no longer useful or no longer valuable and implementing that. So they're in large part going through the same kind of problems. The fix, I think, is going to be a much simpler one because they don't face the same sorts of issues that we do around intellectual property and copyright. So when something comes along that's better, they'll just implement it. It's kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing. Depends on which side of the fence you're on. Any other questions? Nope. Oh, yep. Right in the middle.
I interpret from the presentation that media hype is strong, right?
Yep. The media hype might be a little too strong because the sky is falling, yes.
Are you aware of the vulnerabilities of drugs, widespread?
Yes. Huge. It's been said before, and I'll say it in a very calm kind of way. Most of what we consider to be problems, I should point out, I'm Canadian, which is kind of like American, only we're a hat on America. Most of the problems that we face are very first world kind of problems. It's, I have to stand in line to get my new iPhone, because iPhone comes out in Canada this Friday. I have to stand in line for an iPhone. You know, it's kind of a real big first world problem. The reality is that our systems our lifestyle is so incredibly brittle that it's not going to crack, it's going to shatter. The electric grid has more in common with safety glass than it does with window glass. And the best example I can give for that, and one that will hit home with anybody who lives, north of the middle of the United States, if the August 2003 blackout in the Northeast had happened in February, you would have had human sickles because nobody has the ability to heat their home without the power grid. If you have a high efficiency furnace, it needs electricity to turn on. Getting natural gas to that high efficiency furnace requires power for the pumps and the natural gas substations. Our lifestyle is very, very brittle, and it could go very, very bad at almost any time. The only real solution to that from a solutions development kind of perspective is to increase the redundancy in the system, and this is starting to happen. I don't want to delve down a crazy theoretical trail here, but energy management systems are predicated upon big load, big generation. So you'd have a huge coal plant and then some very high voltage wires going to a city. And the whole system is predicated upon that. And if you want to learn more about how EMS works, corner me and I'll tell you. But that's changing now because we're starting to get micro generation. We're starting to get things that are small generation projects, like individual wind turbines, like if you're living in some states and not others, you can get preferred rates to sell power back to the grid if you generate power on your own. We're seeing waste methane gasification and waste gasification and cogeneration stuff going on. So there's a bunch of things that are changing the nature of the power grid itself that should make it less fragile. And with the power grid being less fragile, other things get less fragile as well. So if the power grid becomes more robust and more sustainable, that means that it's going to be easier for all the natural gas systems to keep working and keep heating the upper half of the United States and Canada. I don't know that that's ultimately a solution to the problem, though. The problem that's facing almost all critical industries, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about finance or we're talking about gas and oil or whether we're talking about electrical or whether we're talking about any one of the ISAC-enabled industries, the problem that we're facing is that they're not meshed. They're built very, very much on hub and spoke. And we all saw this happen. Anybody remember the internet in the 90s when everything was interconnected compared to the internet now where nothing is interconnected? And that's essentially the problem we have, that there isn't a robust mesh. And we can get back to the place where there's a robust mesh, but it's going to take us a while. And I don't know if there will be a disruptive technology between now and then. I'm hoping for disruptive technology because we're burning way too much coal to make electricity and shipping it over these crazy power lines. I mean, the best way to take the grid out, this is actually a public post on one of the SCADA mailing lists. The best way to take the grid out is a rifle. Go out to where you see a high tension line tower, shoot the insulators. Do that 2 towers in a row. You've just taken that line out of service until it can be repaired. Do that to enough of them. And I mean, these things are not hidden. It's pretty easy to find a high tension transmission tower. But if you do that in enough places, you can do things like knock out the Northeast. It's that fragile. So, it'll get fixed someday, I hope. For my kids' sake anyways. I'm basically out of time. Like I said, if you have any questions, corner me. And thank you very much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. And thank most of you for staying awake through the pasta-induced coma. Have a great day.